May the words of my mouth and the meditations of our hearts be acceptable in thy sight, O God, our strength and our Redeemer.
Amen.
When I was a very young student, I served as one of the few altar girls at my Roman Catholic parish in my hometown. The sanctuary was very simple, but it was dramatically marked with a large wooden crucifix that stretched out and over behind the altar. The arms of Jesus seemed to embrace the length of the reredos, and the head of Christ bent down toward the floor, just a little bit like this one, in a brokenness that struck me even at that very young age. It was profoundly moving. One morning before the earliest Mass, I came into the sanctuary to prepare the table, and I was surprised to see the form of an older woman bent over, kneeling on the ground, holding her head in her hands, crying gently behind the altar below the crucifix. It was shocking to me. I was embarrassed. I must have been 10 or 11 years old at the time, and the sight of a grown, dignified woman weeping alone at the feet of Jesus was stunning. I wanted to comfort her, but I was afraid of even being a witness to, not to mention even a participant, in what was surely the most authentic encounter I had ever seen between an adult and God. A few weeks later, while straightening up after the day's services, I knelt down on the floor to reach for a missal that had slipped underneath the priest's chair that was just below the crucifix. And from the ground, I looked upward. And I was stunned again to realize that there, at the foot of that cross, was the first time I was ever able to see directly the face of the Christ. From out in the congregation, you could see the bend of the neck, and you could see the hair and the weave of the crown of thorns. But it was only there on the floor, hidden behind the altar, that one was able to behold Jesus' face. The gospel reading today that recalls this mystery of the Transfiguration is one of Scripture's most powerful stories of holy beholding, of holy recognition. Like so many events in the life of Christ, the simplicity of the story belies the magnitude of what is revealed when this takes place. Just below we meet this passage in Luke, we read about Jesus being very busy. He has gone to Bethsaida and fed 5,000 people. Peter has proclaimed him to be the Messiah, and he has predicted his own passion and revealed to his followers that true discipleship will require nothing less than the giving up of their own lives. This is an incredibly important witness to what Jesus does. But this transfiguration on the mountain tells the story of nothing less than who Jesus is. Apart from the crowds, in the intimate company of a small group of friends, the full glory of God is suddenly made visible. I have to think that up until this point, the disciples must have believed. They must have at least mostly believed and hoped to have known the truth or something of the truth of Christ as God in the world, the fully human and fully divine. But there on the mountain, above the clutter and chaos of cities and crowds, they did not see their friend or their teacher. They did not see their rabbi or their judge. But there on the top of the mountain, they recognized God. At that place of transfiguration, Moses and Elijah appear, speaking with Jesus. Moses, that old steward of the law, and Elijah, the most illustrious of prophets, these two men who had anchored the Jewish faith for hundreds of years as God's people sought to enter into the depths of the Holy One who had created them. It always struck me that in this vision of the fullness of Christ, the totality of who Christ is, the passage takes care to tell us that he spoke with these two men about his own death. Not just that he is the Messiah, not just that he is the one to fulfill the law and the prophets, but that even his death is a necessary thing to understanding who he truly is. And then Peter. I have to admit, Peter is my very favorite. This probably is marginally heretical, but I've always thought of him as something of an overeager undergraduate student. He tries very hard all the time. He wants the professor to love him so badly. He's always the first to raise his hand and the first to be egregiously, insufferably wrong. But who can really blame him here? Master, it is good for us to be here, he says. Yes, it is good for us to be here. It is good for us to see this perfection. Please, let's stay. And God, in perhaps the Bible's best version of the long cane in the old movies that would come out and yank the tedious performer off the stage, God descends with a cloud to repeat the words we have already heard at the sacrament of Christ's baptism. This is my beloved Son. Hear him. Not Peter. My beloved, my Son. Listen to him. This is not just a story about what Jesus does. This is who Jesus is. He guides and nurtures us, yes, but he is not just a teacher or a father. He upsets the accepted order of things, but he is not just a rabble-rouser. He heals, but he is not an ordinary nurse or doctor. Jesus is God, and God's alone. Jesus is God's own heart, alive, tucked within the flesh of a human person. He is the thoughts of God, nothing less than the thoughts of God that blessed and haunted a human mind. And he is God's own tears wept from eyes that ached and love like ours. Jesus is God's insistence that the vastness of his love could only be brought to perfection in something as raw and as fertile as a human heart. Theologians have called the Transfiguration a meeting of the temporal and the eternal, that place of reconciliation between what we perceive around us and what we are destined to become. I like this. But I would offer humbly, too, that the Transfiguration revealed for the disciples and reveals for us today the truest expression of who it is we follow. Jesus is shown to be the fulfillment of God's love for creation. He is affirmed here as how God has chosen to be known and made manifest on earth. I think about this, the creator of everything, from the ground that we stand on, to the sound of an orchestra tuning before a performance, to the steam that rises from a freshly shorn pile of wool in the coolness of a morning in late fall, to the taste of whatever it was that someone once cooked for our six-year-old selves on the couch, and the smell of jasmine as you head west on Hollywood Boulevard at sunset after the first rain in a long time. In this beauty, the creator of this beauty comes into the world in what looks like the worst of it. Poor, ridiculed, and really just an itinerant weirdo who breaks bread with orphans, sex workers, and tax collectors. And God on the mountain says, listen to him. Listen to this one who heals us from the depths of the places even our own hands are afraid to touch. Listen to this one who is a child in the cradle, a boy in the temple, a renegade preacher at a well with women, and in the streets with sinners. This is the one who, in a world where strength and wealth mean survival, he says, blessed are the poor in spirit, for theirs is the kingdom of heaven. Love your enemies. Pray for those who persecute you. In a world for the successful and the shrewd, blessed are the meek, those who mourn and those who are hungry. God is brought face to face with the radiance of his own soul in foreigners and sick children and the ravaged bodies of those who have been forgotten. And this is how God has chosen to be in the world. This is who we follow into Jerusalem. It is appropriate we honor Transfiguration Sunday just before we enter into the season of Lent, as the disciples are assured of Christ's glory on the mountain before they accompany him to his crucifixion. We are assured of Christ's glory before we accompany one another into Lent. We walk together through the desert of these 40 days where our hearts pay particular attention to the distances that we let grow between them. And before we do, we are graced with this brief but remarkable balm of sweet reassurance that the days in the desert have never been for nothing. Because if God is the one who chose to be with us among the broken, he is also the one who promises that our brokenness, however unbearable, is not the final word. With Peter, I would love to stay here for a while and remember the shining garments and the visions of prophets. Wouldn't it be beautiful to just take a breather here and put up a few tents? You know, it's funny, we did that. So if you visit Mount Tabor today, the mountain that's thought to be the site of the Transfiguration, there's actually a church with 3 naves, one for Moses, one for Elijah, and one for Jesus. Wouldn't it just be the best, most perfect thing to rest here while the glory of God has been revealed to us, and it is good that we are here? After a recognition of his true glory, it must have been difficult and disappointing to follow Jesus back down into the city. But the ending of this small piece of Christ's story is not the retreat from beauty of heaven back down into the mess of the world. It is, in fact, the fulfillment of God's glory. A fulfillment that tells us, yes, you are meant for heaven, but you have been blessed here on earth. Listen to him. For Christ's mission in this world to be fulfilled, it must be taken out, it must be held up to the light and walked back down the mountain and revealed in the holiness of the ones our tricky, exquisite God has chosen to lift heavenward. The poor, the ill, and the bereaved. The woman who millennia later knelt weeping alone at the foot of the cross against worn carpet in a Midwestern sanctuary. Because we are a people for whom, when the world sees only decay and death, we anoint new life. We are a people who stumble and fail and mourn and trust that even these are embraced in this reconciliation of humanity to the heart of God, who stretches holy hands back before the beginning of time and forward into eternity and gathers all of the light between them, sets it before us with the murmur, this, all of this, is for you. We are a people who dare celebrate the hidden wholeness in the broken. Nothing less than a broken body, and we dare to name it a communion. Let our hearts and our lives be places where the glory of God is revealed. Let us remember who it is that we follow. I pray in these next few weeks, we be not afraid as we journey with Christ toward Jerusalem. Even as we spend much of this next liturgical season with a story that will take us through the mire of sin and the horror of what we have done when, like the followers of Moses, the beauty was simply too perfect to look upon. We will be led through the city with holy women to the ground below the cross. But we can take heart, because it is at the foot of the cross we see the face of God. Amen.